The Body Keeps the Score. The book was published 12 years ago, and yet here we are. It's 2026, and it's still on the top 10 lists week by week. Not just in psychology, across all categories. It has become one of the best-selling books of the modern era. And it didn't just contribute to the trauma conversation, it defined how an entire generation understands it. And chances are you've encountered it. Maybe you've read it, maybe someone sent you a quote from it, maybe its language changed how you understand your own story. Even if you haven't opened up the book, you felt its impact. Trauma is no longer a clinical term, it's part of the everyday conversation. But something happened along the way. As trauma moved into the mainstream, nuance often didn't come with it. Complex biology got reduced to slogans, healing became an aesthetic, language spread faster than understanding. Truth was mixed with myth. And for some people, that confusion has kept them stuck. Which raises a bigger question. What did we get right? And what did we get wrong? And what has the science uncovered since the book was first written? The man behind the book, Dr. Bessel is here to set the record straight. And he's not alone. With him is Dr. Frank Anderson. For 2 decades, Frank worked inside Bessel's trauma center, learning, practicing, refining the science at its source. In many ways, he represents the next chapter of this work. And in recent years, his rise has been dramatic, carrying trauma research into a new generation and into a new cultural moment. And that matters for me, for you, for everyone, because modern life has changed in ways that make living well harder than it should be. And the conditions that produce trauma are not decreasing, they're accelerating. And most of us are already operating in survival mode, reactive, guarded, just trying to keep up, feeling behind before we even made a choice. And that's why Mighty Pursuit exists, to give you a North Star, integrating mind, body, and spirit into one clear roadmap for living well. The podcast is where we slow down and make sense of one part of that roadmap at a time. And today we zoom in on our mental health, exploring what trauma actually is, what we've misunderstood about it, and what the science now shows about healing in the years ahead. Dr. Bessel is not at the beginning of his career. He's in the final chapter. And as he winds down his public appearances, conversations like this have become rare. Alongside Dr. Anderson, they lay out what may amount to a blueprint for the coming age. And some of what they say may surprise you. All right, guys, quick pause before we jump in. If you haven't heard, we've been quietly building something behind the scenes for the past year. It's called The 9. And if you're getting real value out of this podcast, this is the natural next step. The podcast is powerful, but it's episodic. It's one big idea at a time. Mental health, dating, sex, spirituality, purpose. Each episode stays with a single theme long enough to actually understand it. But the 9 brings everything together. It keeps the 9 core areas of life across mind, body, and spirit in view at the same time. You've probably heard us allude to them each week. Now we're putting them into a rhythm you can actually live with. Every week, the 9 does 3 specific things for you. It directs your attention to the parts of life that need care right now. It offers one clear evidence-based insight drawn from science, history, spiritual wisdom, and real human experience. And 3, it suggests one grounded action you could take in each area to respond. In a world engineered to hijack your attention, the 9 becomes a line of defense, a way to pause, recenter, and notice what's drifting before it quietly compounds. If you do that imperfectly but consistently, you begin to thrive. That's what the 9 is for. You can sign up through the link in the description below or head to mightypursuit.com/the9. All right, now let's get into today's episode. Bessel, in your book, you describe a woman named Marilyn who had a very strong reaction while she was in bed with someone she was dating. And around that same time period, she also developed a serious autoimmune illness that doctors couldn't fully explain. Can you walk us through what was actually happening there?
Oh, it's a very typical story about trauma. People don't remember the event of the past. They reenact the event of the past. And that's the big thing with trauma. You don't remember things, but you automatically react to things. And so her story, I don't quite know how precise it was about that particular person. I may have contaminated 2 stories, but the story about people waking up with somebody and becoming extremely upset with that person for touching them in the middle of the night, or a little sound, or a little snore, or a little elbow, can drive people just crazy, and their whole bodies will react as if they're assaulted. They're still asleep. So they start attacking the person, and you wake up and you go, what the hell am I doing? But then it's in a deeper part of the brain that is still around when you're asleep. So your frontal lobe isn't working, and you start reacting, and then you start screaming or hollering or attacking, and then when you wake up, there's what the hell am I doing? So that's very typical. But the other part of the story, of course, is also typical with trauma, is that core survival part of your brain is still stuck in surviving, and it may automatically react to things. It changes your immune system, it changes your cytokines, your internal hormonal system. That is still alive, even though your frontal lobes know I'm here, and that's a long time ago. That core limbic system and the brainstem doesn't know that the threat is over, so you continue to react to it. And when you're half asleep, or when you're drunk, or you're stoned, or go senile, the capacity of that frontal lobe to take care of you disappears, and you keep reacting as if that old thing is still happening. So fundamentally, trauma is a disorder of your sense of time. You think that, in fact, the event is over, or the experience is over, but your brain continues to react as if it's happening now. And what happens when you get cured from your traumatic stress is, yes, it happened, but it happened to me back then I was 2, back then I was 6 or 12. It's not happening now. But how you come to that awareness can be an extremely complicated matter. Because it's so buried deep in your brain, it has nothing to do with reason and understanding. So you shouldn't react that way, but you do, and you feel deeply ashamed about your reactions. And you cannot trust yourself, and you're afraid that other people will find out what a terribly messed up person you are. So you go to the world so defensively, because you're aware of how sometimes you become too angry or too scared, and you don't want people to see it. So you become very self-conscious in your current life. And so you shut down the capacity to take in good new experiences because you're so defensive.
He's talking about everybody. He's talking, when you're talking about me, right? Like, that's the story. That's what happens. I mean, that was a beautiful description of exactly what happens in a trauma survivor. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in that story. And I think that prior to this conversation going mainstream, a lot of people wouldn't have identified that with trauma. And then there seemed to be like a mass revelation around this subject. I think it's fascinating because that book was written in 2014. And if you look at the charts today, it's like 2026. It's still on the top 10 today.
It's number 1 still.
Which is wild.
It's crazy.
I mean, psychology books don't do that. So why? Why do you think it resonated?
I have no idea. Actually, it's really strange. Like,
Interesting.
When I shopped it around, 2 publishers said, no, this book is not good. There's too many books about trauma right now. We don't need another book about the subject. And I thought, well, I was very proud. My last academic book sold 65,000 copies. Isn't it amazing? Called 60. I had no idea that it would sell in the millions, which it did.
Now, one thing you've said many times, and I've also heard you say in an interview, is obviously people read the book now and it's about trauma, but when people come into your office, they're not aware that they're actually traumatized. And so can you speak? Well,
of course, it changes over time.
That's what I told.
But for most of my years in practice, people would just come in because their relationships didn't work out, or they got, mainly because they felt like their life wasn't going okay, that they screwed up their 3rd marriage. Their kids aren't speaking to them. They're always quarreling with their parents, and so people come in because things aren't working. But I don't think until recently, when everybody started to read my book, I don't think anybody ever came to see me. Oh, I'm here to talk about my trauma. It's really about how my life isn't working out, basically. And so, to some degree, therapy creates a narrative for people. And you say to people, how long has this been going on? How long have you felt this way? Where do you feel it in your body? And you find a timeline, and people say, I've always felt this way. And I go like, do you think you felt this way when you were 4? And they go, no. I didn't feel that way when I was 4. But I started to feel that way when I was 7 or 8. So what's going on in your life when you're 7 or 8? Oh, nothing. Oh, yeah, my parents got divorced and I always moved. That doesn't mean anything. And you dig deeper and then you go, oh, it was really very painful. And so people try to not think about their traumas. Everybody wants to move on. Everybody gets, it was terrible what happened, but I'm going to behave normally. Also because people in peaceful environments want you to function. And if you stay dysfunctional for too long, people say, get over it. And you start getting rejected for their behavior. So people do their best to appear normal. And I think that's true to greater or lesser degree for all of us. You hide that shameful part of yourself. And the more traumatized you are, the more likely to have very shameful parts.
Yeah, because it feels like a lot of people are potentially just in the moment and they're not necessarily connecting their behaviors to their past.
No, that's not how we think in general. Yeah, like, why does this guy piss me off? No, he's an asshole. Like, not because there's something with me that picks up something about him. Like,
So what does unrecognized trauma look like?
Well, it's the same thing, exactly what Bessel said. It's people's lives falling apart, right? Drinking too much, shooting up heroin, cocaine, working too hard, yelling at your kids.
Yeah.
Like, that's unrecognized trauma. Medical illness, we can go down that whole road. Any medical problems really in some way have some kind of origin because of the immunity stuff that Bessel was talking about.
Yeah, but I'd be very careful with that.
I understand that. We can go down that road or we don't have to.
And we will, yeah.
And we will.
Yeah.
That is for me a both and. I'll talk about myself around that. Like, I've had asthma for a really long time, and I have autoimmune disease in my family, for sure. My dad was rheumatoid arthritis. I have asthma. And I also know that when I get a bad asthma attack, it's because I'm not speaking my truth and I'm not speaking up. So for me, with illness, there's often a both and that can contribute. So I think about any kind of medical problem. Is there a psychological component is the way that I would say it. But it's mostly the way people's lives are falling apart. And that's what they come into treatment. Yep. I was telling Matthew the other day, Bessel, nowadays people come in to see us because we're trauma experts. Right. So it's different. You know, they're seeking it out. The language is out there. People know what trauma is, and they do seek us out. Yep. But mostly the average person is coming in because they've hit whatever rock bottom is in their life that says, my life isn't working, I need help.
Yep. You know, it's also is that most of my patients have not read my book. It's too hard for them.
Yeah.
So one of the first reviews I got on Amazon was, this is a disgusting book. It is awful. I did not know how hard to throw it into my fireplace. And I go, that's a good review. Yeah. I mean, I bet a lot of people have that reaction because getting in touch with your trauma is incredibly upsetting, and all these feelings come back. And so a lot of people get triggered by my book, which makes, and I'm not surprised. And people say, it took me a year to slowly read it. So that makes sense. And I'm always surprised that anybody has read the whole book from beginning to end, because it's really very painful material to have to look at how your parents did that, and you had that experience, and you were bullied, and you felt bad, and all that stuff comes up. And you go, I don't want to uncover all of this pain and hurt, and people want to go on. And I admire anybody who has read that book. I go, that's amazing that you finished it. That's great.
Yeah.
Not pleasure reading, you know, like.
Well, and there's a lot of people that buy books like crazy and put them on the shelf and don't read them.
And they read it.
Yeah.
I see people apologize all the time, totally beaten up copy of my book. I'm so sorry. I said, I'm so flattered.
But Bessel, I have to say, you really did bring trauma to the mainstream, like no other person has done with no other book or anything like that. Like now it is in the general public in this way because of what people are doing with that book. It really has changed the whole narrative around trauma.
I wanted to ask about
Go ahead.
because it has become mainstream, and so it's a common word, and now it seems to be described for everything. So what concerns you most about how trauma is talked about today?
Everything becomes a trauma, and I think it cheapens it, but I can't do anything about it. Like when people say, "Oh, I had bad experiences," that's not quite a trauma. A trauma is when it completely wipes you out. If there's nothing you can do, it's when you just stand by helplessly while something is happening. But it's complex because what became more and more real about trauma is how much trauma occurs within the family with chronic patterns of people just not paying attention or dismissing your feelings or not really seeing what's going on. And technically, that's not a trauma. And what people call it in the field, which I really don't like at all, is little t trauma.
Oh, I was just going to say, it drives me crazy too. Same thing.
Because it's not minor if your mom is too depressed to pay attention to you. And so what we got to see is there's an incredibly complex overlap between the security of your attachment system and your relationship to caregivers and trauma. And what we know now is that if you really have parents who you really deep trust in a very deep way, we saw it in some research done with burn victims. The burn victims who had warm relationship with their mothers got less than half the amount of painkillers, and their wounds healed twice as fast as the other people. So the issue of the security of your attachment is critical, and that is a huge issue in our society, in that we were meant to be tribal people, and we're getting more and more separated from our tribes. The issue of who you belong to, who are your people, who do you identify with, gets ignored systematically. And one of the guys I just interviewed this morning said, when I was a kid, had a very bad background, we always played in the streets. Then after 11 years in jail, I went to my old neighborhood, and the kids are not playing in the streets anymore. The kids are sitting at home behind their screens. And that's a huge issue in our society, because we're really meant to do what we are doing here, sit together and say, don't listen to this guy, or you should sound, it's really interactive. And people lose that interaction. And I think it's a huge public health issue that we're barely beginning to look at, how people don't feel connected to people anymore. They are connected to a flat, two-dimensional screen, which has great advantages and enormous problems.
One of the things that was shocking for me during my residency, we went to the same residency program, not at the same time, but I did some research with Bob Waldinger, and we looked at a bunch of upper middle class kids who were lived in Newton. They were at McLean Hospital, and they had horrible PTSD symptoms, right? And then there was another group of kids who were like in the gangs in Brooklyn, or in the Bronx in New York. And the kids from the Bronx in New York had much less PTSD than these kids in their upper middle class suburbs in isolation. Because all the kids in the gangs were like, I have my people. We're together. This is part of our life. We get through it together. It was striking to see. They didn't have a lot of financial resource, but they had much less PTSD because they had much stronger connections than the upper middle class kids did in the suburbs. So that piece is really powerful.
I didn't know you did it.
Yeah, I did that. It was fascinating to see the difference, and it was true.
So, in terms of the common human experience becoming the trauma vernacular putting on top of it, so normal discomfort, conflict, heartbreak, stress, those are things that are kind of labeled as trauma.
So, and we wouldn't. If you haven't had your heart broken, you don't know anything about life. being heartbroken is incredibly painful, and it's incredibly maturing, but it's part of life.
So good. So this is the whole, for me, depending on which group you lived in, if you're a baby boomer, if you're a Gen Z, Gen X, different people are defining trauma differently. Bessel is talking about, hey, that's a normal part of life if you have heartbreak.
Yeah, and it's terrible. I know it very well.
So what do you consider trauma versus life? Like, how do you make that distinction, right?
Yeah, trauma is really being left all by yourself. We need context, we need connection, we need to be known, we need to be seen. And when, the essence of trauma is somebody beats you up, somebody rapes you, and you protest. It doesn't make them the difference. You try to fight back, it doesn't then make the difference. It is not being able to make a difference and having nobody else to make up for your own helplessness. I think that's, for me, at the core of trauma, when you stand helplessly by and say, oh my God. But even if your heart is broken, hopefully you still have a friend who shares your pain with you and say, you'll get over it someday. You meet somebody else, and somebody who can listen to you and who feels sorry for you. Feeling sorry for yourself and for other people actually is a useful part of life. Instead of saying, you shouldn't feel sorry for yourself, I need to say to many people, you actually you deserve to feel much more sorry for yourself and to have that inner empathy for what you have gone through over there. And so that's very much part of what is gratifying for us as trauma therapists is the stories we hear are unspeakably bad stories. And even after having done this work for 50 years, I still regularly sit in my office and say, that's unbelievable. And people say, you mean you don't believe me? I said, no, it's unbelievable that people did that to you. And it's unbelievable that you survived and you're here. And I think one of the big things that fertilizes us is we are in awe that the people who we see have survived what they went through. And they did the best they could. And their best day may not be particularly admirable or amazing, but still, given where they came from, you go like, wow, and you're still here. Huh? And the stories that people go through is just unspeakable.
I don't know if you even said this. I've got so many pearls in my head popping up through the years of kind of knowing you for so long. But I remember you saying people with, tell me if this is accurate, people with trauma don't fear the worst case scenario. They know the worst case scenario. Did you say this?
Something
probably. I remember that. And the other thing I really remember was it's not only about the event, the fear, helplessness, horror. It's about who was with you after. That's almost more important.
Yeah, and that's what I say. Oprah Winfrey came out with Bruce Perry book, What Happened to You? And yes, what happened to you is very important. Right. But I say maybe even more important is, and who was there for you? Because we are an astoundingly resilient species, human beings. It's important for us to know that we have wiped out almost every other species on the face of the earth except for cockroaches and cats, But we're in that category. And how do we survive? We survive because we're a member of teams and of villages and of families. We don't survive by ourselves. We survive because we can collaborate. And then when you think about the screens, you go like, maybe the screens don't help much to make people more collaboratively. And that's why I love people who play music together, who dance together, who act together, do plays together, because it's involved, being involved with each other, cooking together. I'm doing a podcast for Ukraine tomorrow. I know how the hell people are surviving bombardments all the time, but what I say is cook for each other. Make your bed for each other. Do something for each other so you feel, I am making a difference in people's lives. And the moment you are completely helpless, you go down the drain.
I want to just point out, this is this guy who's been doing research and knows neuroscience like better than most. This is like, he's not saying a pill or a drug or any kind of technique. Right. He's talking about connection, healing trauma. Yeah. And it's the same thing that Bob Waldinger, I mentioned him before, the happiness part, that was part of the George Valiant study. They looked at these Harvard people, they're still looking at the family members and stuff like this, and it's the same exact thing. So we take all this complexity and we look at all the science, which is important, but Bessel's like, in this very basic way, connection and community is what's healing. I mean, that's
our nature. That's actually.
So I love that.
Yeah, it's not incidental. And so what has happened in our field is that 50 years ago, when we invented this diagnosis, nobody knew anything about treatment. And then the race was on for your treatment to be officially recognized as what the insurance companies will pay for. It became a big race to get the right treatment. And a lot of treatments were invented. Many of them have some success, and having some success means you can sometimes make it evidence-based. But when people ask me, so what's really learning? Well, we learned about EMDR, we learned about neurofeedback, we learned about psychedelics. They all are amazingly helpful. But when people say, what's the best treatment? I go, we don't know. It's 2026. 10 years ago, I knew nothing about psychedelics. Now I've seen the most amazing results with psychedelics, but not for everybody. Yeah, and maybe 10 years from now, we may laugh at what we do in 2026 because there will be some other things coming along. So we are very much in a discovery mode.
Now, of course, you can't put everybody under an MRI machine, but when I read your book, there was a couple things that stuck out to me. And I wonder if this threshold of defining something as trauma is actually something that you would see happening in the brain, because there was a couple things. And so can you explain what actually changes inside the brain when you're traumatized?
Well, the brain has 85 billion neurons. And so our brain is as complex as the universe. And so anything that explains something in simple terms is by definition wrong.
That's true.
And so it affects just about every system in your brain. It affects how you perceive time. It affects what is dangerous and what's safe. So what people talk about these days, which we did not use in 2014 when I wrote that book, is the salience network. What your brain interprets as being important. And something maybe Frank will go, there's nothing. I will go like, did you hear that? Did you smell that? Oh my God. And he'll go like, what you're getting upset about? That's my little amygdala sending danger signals to my brain. And when I'm with him, I go, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't feel this way. And let me just be ashamed of myself and not think you're a crazy person. But whenever I hear that sound or somebody does that, I go crazy. And so that means that your whole central nervous system is geared towards picking up danger in a different way that other people pick it up. And it changes your capacity to inhibit your impulses. Affects the orbital prefrontal cortex. And if you get traumatized at a certain age, and our friend Marty Teicher has really spelled it out, trauma at that age causes that, different things at different ages. Brilliant piece of work.
Oh my God, so good.
We should know about.
Yeah, it's so good.
And so it has a real impact. And so if, trauma between the ages of 3 and 5 makes it very hard for you to feel like blowing up and saying, no, I'm just going to calm myself down. You need to have, I call the orbital prefrontal cortex your finger-wagging receptor. So if somebody says to you, terrible things will happen to you if you keep doing that, if you have an orbital prefrontal cortex, you go, oh, I shouldn't do it. But if you don't have a receptor there, you keep doing the same thing because that warning sign cannot come into your brain because you don't have the receptor for warning. And so it sets up many different things. It sets up changes in the way you perceive your body. Has big effect on the insula, big effect on the precuneus of how you view yourself, big effect on the hippocampus that gives you a sense of perspective in time. So almost every system in your brain gets affected according to what we know in 2026. But, it's evolving, and now everybody thinks, if we just understand the brain, we'll understand the mind.
Yeah.
No, we're learning a lot with neuroscience, very good learning.
Yeah.
But the complexity of who we are, how we live in this symbolic world, as William James pointed out over 100 years ago, he said already, our core identity is a religious identity of what am I on this earth for? What's my purpose in life? How can we accept that we're born and that we're going to die? How do we interpret why we're here? And that becomes the core of our identity. Neuroscience is not, I don't think it's going to tell us. But you may be a Shiite Muslim. I may be a rabid Catholic. And you'll go, I need to kill you.
Yeah.
But we have the same notion of the world, that God is my God and not your God.
Yeah.
And so we have different perceptions. And so, but these are very powerful things in people's minds. I don't think that neuroscience is going to help us to really explain that. It's happening in the psychedelic world. It's very clear psychedelics can be enormously positive effects. I happen to have the good fortune of being the principal investigator of one of the study sites.
Yes.
That's a very big deal for me. And now when I look at what I've been covering about psychedelics too, it's all about what it does to the brain. And I wrote a paper that I thought was a very important paper, is what it does to your sense of self. But the neuroscience have nothing to say about it.
It's a mystical experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that mystical experience, we don't quite know what it is. That opens up your heart and your mind to new things. But everybody's studying what happens in that little circuit in the brain, but that's not going to explain how you get a loving relationship to yourself.
Now, what's interesting about that is I think
I love this conversation. Yeah, this is so good.
There is two studies on Johns Hopkins and one other one, and they showed that one of them, 54% of people that identified as atheists or materialists changed their worldview after taking psychedelics. At Johns Hopkins, that number was 62 and 64%.
Yeah.
So if someone goes to a mosque or a synagogue or a church service, what are you going to get, like 1 or 2% of people when they sit in there to completely change their worldview? So I think it speaks to the power of what you're talking about. Yeah.
But it's also very important to have that sense of mission. And so I recently consulted on a case of a woman who done very poorly, and I said, but she needs to become a Jehovah's Witness. So she's a member of a sect of people who believe that God loves them and they have a mission in the world. And that's what's missing in her life. She feels like she doesn't belong here. And what she really needs is a very strong religious identity of God wants me to do something in this world. And I don't think Frank has the feeling that God wants him to do something in the world, nor do I. But we do have a deep sense of purpose.
100%.
And that's given to you.
Yeah.
That's not something you can make happen, but it's because somehow you catch the bug. And then that's what I need to do with my life.
How do you put these two worlds together? Because this is like this neuroscience guy saying, neuroscience really doesn't matter.
No, but I'm not saying that either.
I know. Well, that's what I want. I want to hear.
It does matter, but it's not the full story.
How do you put it together? Yeah. How do you put these two worlds together? Because you're talking about two very different things. Right. So say how you put them together.
So I think the current way of looking at the brain as having a default mode network which is devoted to you. And what we learned, unbelievably important piece of research by Ruth Lanius, is that when you're traumatized and there is nothing happening, the world passes you by. You don't have a state of, I like this and that's important to me. And you don't have this internal sense of, I'm an important person who feels a sense of pleasure. And so when there is no danger, you feel nothing. Yeah. But when something is dangerous, you feel better. And so you start hanging out with a motorcycle gang, or you start going to a bar where people beat each other up, or you hook up with a drug-addicted alcoholic guy, and you say, I'm going to save him, but the moment he becomes non-drug addicted alcoholic, he's boring. Mm-hmm. And we see that in our field, that people are also quite energized by their trauma in some ways and give them a sense of purpose. And when the trauma goes down, they feel dead inside. So a big challenge in overcoming trauma is, how do I find something to devote myself to that is actually helping me and the people in my life? And finding that, it can be a major challenge. And indeed, we found in psychedelics, they really do help quite a bit in that direction. But most trauma treatments do. Once you do EMDR with people and it works, they also get a sense, oh, now my energy is freed up to do something new.
Yeah.
So dealing with these imprints of trauma and blowing up and getting out of control and not being able to sleep and having your body being disturbed takes an enormous amount of energy to keep it under control. Who was the first to mention? Pierre Genet, 1889, says, the traumatized people spend all their energy on trying to keep it together, and that requires an enormous amount of energy, and because of that, they have a hard time learning from experience, because all their energy goes into just functioning and keeping it together. And I thought that's a brilliant observation, actually. And then in the cases where we help people to really feel like the trauma is over, they get a lot of new energy to devote to their lives.
I think the neuroscience piece is interesting, though. One of the chapters that struck me the most is when you were talking about speechless horror.
Yeah.
And so basically, when people relive their trauma, the language of the center of the brain starts to go offline. And so, can you explain that piece of this?
Say it again.
So the language center of the brain goes offline. The speechless horror. Can you explain how that actually works?
Yeah. Well, we saw that somewhat to our surprise in our brain scans. That, to my mind, is maybe the only study ever done where people relive their rape in the scanner. Yeah. I think people would not be allowed to do it again because it was very traumatizing.
How long ago was this?
This was more than 25 years ago.
Okay, wow.
But today you couldn't do it anymore. But boy, am I grateful for the people who've sacrificed themselves, because we saw that when you're in your trauma, that whole part of your brain disappears. Yeah. And of course, we should know that, because we know that when we are in an argument with our loved ones, that we sound like blubbering idiots. And nobody should just record your arguments with your, God, that's so stupid, outrageous, and good nobody ever got to listen to me. And of course, Shakespeare, who knew everything, when there's a trauma, he said, and they got struck with speechless terror. Yeah. They became dumbfounded. Yeah. We know it, the language knows it, but psychologists still say, tell me your trauma story. But no, the trauma story keeps shifting. Yeah. The more calm and the more capable you are of activating these areas of the brain that got knocked out. And the story changes. The more calm and mindful you feel, and all kind of other details come up that you did not know about before because your mind effectively pushed it away.
Mm. Totally hijacked.
Yeah.
This is what I think about a differentiation. Because when Bessel's talking about, like, when you're triggered and you're activated, there's no differentiation. Yeah. There's no difference between past and present.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And you are only in your past. Yeah. Maybe it was Louis Casalino who said 90% of the input comes from previous experience, right? To help us feel safe. So when we're in that activated state, we have no capacity for present awareness or the ability to kind of process. This is why, don't yell at your kids. Stop and come back and recover. Don't have that argument. Stop it. Come back, recover, and then talk about it differently because you're in a very different state of mind, very different capacity to have a conversation. I talk about it as differentiation, past from present. People are only in their past when they're triggered, and get back into differentiation to see the then and now in order for you to be able to show up differently in the world.
And then, of course, for neuroscience is very helpful because you get to see that when people are able to observe themselves, they activate that medial prefrontal cortex. And when people are into their trauma, that part of the brain goes away. And if you cannot observe yourself, in the book I called the watchtower of your brain, if you cannot observe yourself, you cannot change anything.
It's huge.
You cannot make use of psychotherapy because in psychotherapy you need to say, oh, I wonder why I feel this way. Oh, I wonder where it comes from. I wonder what I can do about it. That means you need to have an observing self, which your 2-year-old doesn't have. And I like to tell people, go home and play with the 2-year-olds, and they will teach you that CBT doesn't work because you can explain what their behavior is bad or destructive, but when you don't have a medial prefrontal cortex, you cannot observe yourself.
It's such a key component to healing. It really is being with instead of being in.
Yeah. I mean, so we were talking about the sense of mission, kind of the spiritual piece, the neuroscience. The third thing that was one of the biggest revelations over the last decade is just how integrated the mind-body connection, which is just mind-blowing. And one very public example of this was, Lady Gaga's in her late 30s right now, but when she was 19, she was raped. And then in 2017, which was years after this had happened, she spoke about how she had a psychotic break, which landed her in a mental hospital. And so looking back in recent years, she said, I had a total psychotic break from my trauma. I started to experience this incredible, intense pain throughout my entire body that mimicked the illness I felt after I was raped. I've had so many MRIs and scans where they don't find anything, but your body remembers. And so what is your take on that, this idea of trauma producing physical health symptoms?
Well, that's like... My answer is duh. Because if you know anything about being scared to death, it's your body reacts. An angry person lives in an angry body. And if you become angry with me, it's likely that I'll pick it up. Even though you'll pretend to be very sweet and nice to me, your body posture will change enough. So I pick up, he's getting pissed off with me. Or if you get bored, I picked it up. So we live in our bodies, and a depressed person lives in a depressed body, and there's certain stance. And a joyful person lives in a joyful body. So we are our bodies, and so that's our Western heritage is to separate the two of them. But the function of your brain is to take care of your body. So you breathe, you go to the bathroom, sleep, and eat all sort of stuff. That's the primary thing. We are an organism. And in many ways, we're like our dogs and our camels and other creatures. And then we have this little frontal lobe that makes us feel elevated about everything else. That allows us to talk and explain things and create beautiful things. And that also creates a lot of animosity between us.
What is your take on that? I mean, the idea of even fibromyalgia is like, a lot of people thought it was like a woo-woo diagnosis for a long time. And all of a sudden you're getting like this physical pain.
I'm not sure if we have moved beyond that, actually. The head of the National Institute for Rheumatology, who just died, was my neighbor in my cabin in Vermont. And when I brought up fibromyalgia, he said, that's a bullshit diagnosis. That's the chief rheumatologist in the country, in the world. The person who is most involved in that stuff says, that's just nonsense.
Why?
Because it's complex. And anything that's complex and not linear, people go, because it's the mind that people are pretending. Except when people get treated for their trauma, the fibromyalgia tends to settle. So the ultimate cure is when your body feels safe. And that's also the hardest thing to. We're just getting my last scientific article is coming out this month, and it's about how even if your mind seems to have resolved the trauma, your body oftentimes continues to react to the world as if you're your trauma. And so just because you no longer have PTSD doesn't mean that your body knows that you're safe. And the issue of your body feeling safe is maybe the greatest challenge that we face. And that's why body workers and yoga and Tai Chi and forms of dancing may be so good for trauma because it helps you to have a body that works for you.
Well, I mean, I've had personal experience with that because, so you have the vagus nerve, right? And the vagus nerve is then connected to the gut. And so literally the mind-gut connection too, it's just completely like dysregulates your gut.
I'm super excited about the evolution of what we're learning about immunology in a way that we did not know before. When we were in medical school, there was no immunology classes. So we didn't really understand the effects of cortisol, the effect of our immune system on our health and on our wellness. And for me, there is, like, people talk about mind-body connection in a very disconnected way. It's like it's a word or a phrase, but in fact, putting them together is really, really important. So we know that the mind affects the brain and the body, and vice versa. So for me,
I know first talked about it. Charles Darwin has a big chapter.
I was going to say Dan Siegel, but you're going way back.
1872, The Emotional Special Animals of Man. Darwin says, whenever the mind is excited, it affects the state of the heart and the lungs. And whenever the heart and lungs change, it affects the state of the mind. So a very explicit connection between physiological function and the brain. And then that gets pushed aside. And now some people are talking about it. But I think, like, in my senior year of medical school, we were supposed to write a thesis to prove that we're good scientists. And I wanted to write about emotional factors in surviving cancer. And the dean called me in his office. He said, if you write about it, you will not graduate from medical school, and we'll make sure that nobody takes you on after that.
Oh my God.
It was a forbidden topic. And still, medicine likes to be mechanical and linear, and the whole issue of who takes care of you and who is there for you and who holds you and who touches you is still very much at the periphery of our knowledge. Except in pediatrics, where John Bowlby made a movie, A Child Goes to the Hospital, and shows how agonizing it is for a child to be separated from their parents. And every pediatrician since that time has watched that movie and knows how important parents are. When I did my pediatric rotation, pediatrics was not quite aware of it yet, and parents were not allowed to visit their kids around the clock. But now in pediatrics, people know it.
It's attachment theory.
I've treated so many patients, adults now, who have these horrible attachment traumas, and when you kind of get back into being with their body and understanding what they're holding, they're like, I was in an oxygen tent with an asthma reaction all by myself for a week in the hospital. I had tonsils taken out and I was alone. I got dropped off. I was sitting in that crib crying. They literally have images of these very early experiences just going to the hospital for routine exams. So many people I've seen. And that gets stored implicitly because they're too young to have memory, but they have all these physical problems. It's over and over and over again.
And even if you have a memory, the imprint is still there. Alongside the memory. Like it's
100%.
So a lot of people don't remember things because the mind wants to go on and push it away.
So alongside the kind of full body symptoms, physical symptoms, I mean, we alluded to this up front, but you've called these survival strategies. But
that's what I call them.
There's sort of signs, adaptive coping mechanisms that people have that are kind of indicate they might be traumatized. So what are the most common ones that you guys see?
Well, the most common one is drug addiction, of course. There's a 4,600% correlation between child abuse and drug abuse. That, yes, you can become a drug abuser without having been traumatized, but it's hard. But if you have been traumatized, it becomes very easy because your body is your enemy. And I like to, when I give lectures, say, imagine I have some value with fentanyl here. Say, and would anybody like some fentanyl? I have it. I won't tell anybody about it. Almost nobody would show up. Say, this guy's crazy. But there will be a few people in the audience who are desperate enough. They'll do anything to feel better. They'll take the fentanyl. And so what is missing in our discussion about the epidemic of drug abuse is social conditions. Because if you have a future, if you know that you're cared for and that you're precious and that you're a loved person, it's very unlikely that you will really do this very dangerous things to yourself. But if nobody gives a shit anyway whether you live or die, and you're not needed, and you're superfluous, and you cannot support your family, why not?
So many people have a much stronger connection to the substance than they do to any people. Like a lot of, is it Johann Hari who says the opposite of sobriety is not, or the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection,
really?
Right? Really? Yeah, the opposite of, and I really see that. And the people, when you have nobody, when you're in that empty, alone, nothing place, you reach out for a substance because that's your main connection. And these people have a very strong connection to that. I mean, I think any behavior that people say is problematic, we can put depression, anxiety, eating disorder, substance abuse, suicidality, all of the yelling at your kids, all of these behaviors or symptoms. I say any symptom or any behavior is a survival strategy in some way, if you look at it deep enough. Is there a biological component? Yeah, often also but there's also the emotional component. Like that's what people, we said earlier, that's what people come into the office for. I'm yelling at my kids. I'm not productive at work. My partner and I are fighting. Those are all that's what I call survival strategies to something underlying that's being buried and put away.
And of course, substances are the primary thing. And of course, psychiatry feeds into that. Psychiatry, starting about when Frank was a resident, so I was a teacher by the time, then psychopharmacology became the answer.
Yeah.
So people say, just take a pill, but don't take that pill from that guy. Take a pill from me, and we'll put that guy in jail. But if I give you a pill, I can earn a lot of money. And there's not quite a good differentiation between the illegal pills and the legal pills, except that some of them are legal and somebody makes money over it, and other pills aren't. But fundamentally, psychiatry, and sometimes it works. You can take a pill and suppress your symptoms, which may sometimes be very helpful. When I taught Frank, I was the chief psychopharmacology at one of the Harvard teaching hospitals. So I know something about what medication can do for people, but it doesn't solve things. It helps you to not feel certain things or to focus a little bit differently, but it doesn't resolve anything. And so what is sad about psychiatry is they had something that it was somewhat helpful, but then they give up everything else. And they no longer talk with people, and they no longer know people, and what their internal issues are. And they have handed it all to social workers and people like that who get to have all the fun to do the psychotherapy.
It's one of the things for me that was learning about the neurobiology of PTSD and dissociation. There are definite neurotransmitter dysregulations. So serotonin is low, dopamine and norepinephrine is high, like GABA is low, glutamate is high. We know that. There's certain dysregulations if you know the neurobiology, and medications do help regulate some of that dysregulation. So there's a reality there. And what I think personally is the biggest contributions to psychedelics, separate from what the psychedelics does, is they say, especially MDMA, you have to be in therapy and when you're doing the medication. So doing medications alone is not helpful. Doing medications in the combination of psychotherapy is a good combination. And that's what I think psychedelics is bringing. Hey, don't just sit in a lab and take IV ketamine for 8 sessions and then you're fine. No, our field is saying, take your ketamine and then let's sit with you and do psychotherapy with it. That's a better combination from my perspective.
And we're very worried about it. Those of us in the psychedelic world are very worried that there's a large number of funding people who are promoting the development of a psychedelic substance that you can take by yourself.
Yes.
And you can charge a lot of money for it, and it doesn't cause mystical experiences. And because you can make much more money if you omit the psychotherapy.
That's right.
But it is really waking people up to have access to stuff. And once you have access to it, let's do the work.
Yes.
So in our world, we talk a lot about integration.
Yes.
As being a central part of the whole series.
Now, do these survival strategies and coping mechanism, do they all fall under fight, flight, freeze? I mean, then people have been saying this fawn thing recently. So,
no.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say because I have feelings about this. So go ahead.
The fight, flight, freeze are normal responses.
Yeah.
And they need to be intact. And part of what goes wrong with PTSD is you have an exaggerated fight-flight response or an exaggerated freeze response. But Pavlov, for example, discovers with his dogs is that they get traumatized because they cannot move. And in order to overcome something, you need to be able to move. And that was, for many years, a lot of major people thought movement is the essence for trauma. And if you get immobilized and you cannot do anything, that causes trauma. And I think they were basically correct about it. You need to take action. And the action oftentimes is fight-flight. And they show movies I took myself in New York after 9/11 of people running and people moving. And there was almost no PTSD in New York because the community was extremely supportive. Nobody was blaming any New Yorker for what happened, and people were able to run and move.
That goes back to what you said earlier about the environment.
Well, and I see this. I see the two energies, and this is where I think Ruth is the one who talks about the two subtypes of PTSD. Hyperarousal, which is activation, go, and hypoarousal, which is numb, detached, and immobilized. So I think there's two ways we have a trauma response and different. I look at the energy of any survival strategy. Is it an activated energy where I'm mobilized? Is it this hypo-arousal?
And also happen in the same person also sometimes.
And Wendy DeAndrea talks about the mixed states of it all. So you can be frozen and immobilized. You know, you can have both. So
Marty Horowitz is the first person.
Well, he did it before. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, and he's still alive, and I talk to him sometimes.
Okay, I did not know.
But he was really the real pioneer, and I'm always surprised how nice he is to me, despite the fact that I've become much better known than he was. But he was the real pioneer.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
He was the real pioneer.
I've known Wendy's work over his, but that's good to hear.
Now, I think stories help people locate, and put context to what you're talking about. There's a story that came across that was interesting. Another actress, Lily Collins, she described her experience being verbally and emotionally abused in a relationship. And I think some of this about what we're talking about, survival strategies, you could kind of piece in here. So she said, my romantic toxic relationship was verbal and emotional abuse and being made to feel very small. He would call me Little Lily, and he'd use awful words about me in terms of what I was wearing and would call me a whore and all these things. There were awful words, and then there were belittling words. I became quite silent and comfortable in silence, and feeling like I had to make myself small to feel super safe. When prey feel threatened, they make themselves as small as possible, possibly by not eating, by making themselves look as least juicy and enticing as possible, and that's where they feel the safest. So when you hear that,
that's very articulate.
How would you unpack that?
I have two reactions to it. One, it's real, and domestic violence can be immensely debilitating, but there's also an element of what's her background? The first time that this guy calls her something awful, your fight-flight response is supposed to get activated.
Yes.
And you're supposed to say, you're not the guy I want to be with. I don't want to be put down and humiliated. And so I would assume that there was something before that boyfriend that made her numb out in response to stuff like that she allowed her to put up with that sort of abuse until it became too bad. But once you're in that relationship, it's too late. But like my daughter, who I know was not abused, I imagine that she would not end up in a relationship like that, because her expectations are, if somebody treats me with respect. And the moment somebody hits me, I go, I'm the hell out of here. I don't want to be hit. So there's obviously a complex combination of predisposing issues.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, and once you are predisposed, then you're more likely to get traumatized because you don't pick up the danger signs. So the fight-flight response doesn't work. And then once you're really into the relationship, then you get this intense attachment to the person who abuses you. Because when you're terrified, you go to the nearest person to comfort you. And for many people, the person who comforts them is the abusive person. And you get these very complex relationships of intense dependence on and intense terror of the same person. And so that combination is a real terribly pathological response, but it is very common. But it starts off, to my mind, with what people were prepared for in their own families.
I have so much going on in my inside of me right now as Bessel's talking about being involved in these complicated domestic abusive relationships. And I'll talk about myself personally, because this is what's coming up for me. Like growing, it takes two people to stay in a dysfunctional family. Yeah. It's not just one, it takes two. And what I did in my life, being the recipient of both, my first adult relationship, I was abusive like my father, and I was attracted to a passive woman like my mother. Yeah. So I kind of took on one side, and I was attracted to the other side, right? And that was, I felt horrible. I had so much self-loathing. I hated myself for it. So I'm like, get out. I got out of that. It was so bad, but I totally reenacted what I grew up in. And then my second relationship, I did the exact opposite. Yeah. I became passive and accommodating, and I was with this guy at that time who was just abusive and volatile, and just like my father. Right. So it really is the dynamic of the two, and people, when you get stuck, and it's not to blame the victim or blame the perpetrator. That's not what I'm talking about.
No, but it's a very core issue. And you see this a lot. People feel comfortable talking about themselves as the victim, but have a very hard time talking about how they keep that relationship going and what their role is of not setting limits, putting up with, dissociating, disappearing, becoming silent, etc.
It's the both and of any of these relationships. And I think we do focus on the loud, angry perpetrator more than the passive accommodator. And it's really both. And I'm not interested in blaming anyone because, as Bessel said, you absorb both of those from your, what I call core wound, or those early childhood experiences. So whatever side you're on, you're enacting something that's inside of you. And for me, I did both, and neither one worked.
What strikes me about, and you guys have mentioned this multiple times, in this story that I just shared, that was like emotional abuse. So it wasn't necessarily physical abuse. And, you know, if you go back to the 1970s, 1980s, a lot of the conversation dialogue around trauma is war, rape, physical activities, car accidents. So this was emotional. And you guys have mentioned multiple times about attachment, developmental. And so it seems like this circles back to what actually could lead to trauma to begin with. It doesn't have to be a physical type event to cause this.
So could I just, before, I have to point out this guy, because he, as long as I've known you, I met you in 1992, he was trying to bring complex PTSD to the world, which is relational trauma. And I really want to say that about you, Bessel, because what you're talking about is complex PTSD or relational trauma. And for whatever reason, you were there being the steward of this. Could you talk about that and say why that was such a big passion of yours? Because for your whole, as long as I've known you, that's been important.
Yeah, I think it's, again, my own background. My parents who were not were not abusive, but they were extreme religious fanatics of the anti-sexual variety, cold. And I had to leave the Netherlands to get away from my parents. And I moved to the outside of the world. And I had to do that for my survival. And I really... If I hadn't done that, I might have killed myself or something. And so I really needed to get away from it. But I also got to know how incredibly important friendship was at that time.
Interesting.
And so I got to really experience both of them very deeply myself. And somehow I've always been tremendously attracted to attachment researchers. I stayed with John Bowlby in his house, which I'm very proud of, and I gave the first John Bowlby Memorial Lecture. And that's great because he was the great attachment researcher who, his father was the physician to Queen Victoria, and he had a typical British family, upper-class family. He was sent off to boarding school at age 6, and he knew nothing about attachment. So like all attachment researchers, they said, I didn't get any attachment. Why do people worry about their parents? Let's go study that. And so we all study what we know least about. Like I studied body-mind relationships because I'm not a particularly embodied person.
100%.
We always study what we don't know. But the attachment piece was very obvious to me. And what also happened in my family and many other families, the family got split. Both of my sisters became nuns, Protestant nuns. There are no Protestant nuns except for my sisters. That's how extreme it was. So they went that way, and I went the other way.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what happens in families all the time, is that once you start telling the truth, the family will probably turn against you.
That's right.
And so I'm really much into that these days, is how hard it is to tell the truth. Because you lose your context. You lose the people who you lose your tribe.
100%.
And we see this all the time in our practice, how incredibly much courage it takes to actually allow yourself to know the truth and to speak it.
It's such a risk. It's such a risk. Bessel, I love that you're talking about your origin story. Like, I haven't heard you talk about it that much. It really, I just felt a lot there in that moment when you're talking about it. It makes so much sense in the context of, you don't devote your whole life to this because it's an interesting subject. It's like totally resonant. And
if it weren't personal, I'd become an interior decorator.
That's exactly right. And I want to say one other thing about the adaptations. We talked about survival strategies, adaptations. Your sister becomes a nun, you become like the world's renowned trauma expert. I say this about my brother and I. My brother and I were so traumatically attached. Like, we were in that one bedroom together through all the shit. He was my savior. We were so traumatically bonded. And like, I become a trauma expert. He's an avid hunter. And he has a gun, and he will kill any animal. He carries a gun. He buys guns for his kids. Like, and I've talked to my brother about this. I'm like, Ross, isn't this kind of funny? Like, you hunt and kill everything, and that is his adaptation to a similar household. You know, and it's like, so different kids, similar situations.
And it's so nonlinear.
It's so nonlinear.
Oftentimes people I interview say, tell me about your trauma story to help me understand. And I go like, actually, I'm one of 5 kids, and none of the other 4 could care less about the subject I'm studying.
Right.
But there's roots in my family, undoubtedly. But so is the fact that my other brother became the Minister of the Environment in the Netherlands. You could explain that also. How my sister became a nun. You can explain it also. So it's never like, oh, that causes that.
Yeah.
Well, why? That's so fascinating,
it's
though.
true.
So why would something cause severe trauma in one person and the same sibling who might have gotten beaten or whatever? It's not.
It's not a trauma. It's what fascinates you, what interests you. And so my sisters clearly decided to belong to a community where people had to love them, because that's what convents are.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I know that from experience, because I spent a good amount of time in the monastery of Thésée when I was in France. Became later very famous. And I thought about our monastery because it was very regimented. They sang beautiful music. They talked about spiritual things. They had good food. And things were orderly and loving.
It was a family, a better family.
Yeah, it really, I understand it quite well, actually. I'm not against any of that.
Yeah.
It just happens to be not the road that I chose or somehow happened to me.
You talk about what people are interested in.
Yeah.
I also, you and I have never talked about this, so I want to hear what your thoughts are about resilience.
Yeah.
Right? Like we use this word resilient, and like I've been unpacking it. Like, what the heck is resilience, right? Yeah. Because, Oprah has her abuse, and that's what happens to her.
Yeah.
Somebody else is like a heroin addict, sitting on the streets, homeless, and with the same history or similar histories. And I was like, why did I, with my history, get up at 4 a.m. and study every day to get out of the house by going to school, right? And it's like temperament, it's environment. Could you speak to resilience?
It's so multifactorial.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I had a kindergarten teacher whose name I remember at age 5, who I remember loving me. Did that have a big impact on me? Maybe. I had another teacher in 3rd grade who said, you're a little genius. Nobody had said that before.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, maybe I'm smart. And so these little things happen.
Yeah.
And there are so many factors.
That's it,
And nothing predicts anything in particular. The same family that produces a brilliant scientist may also have produced a drug addict.
Yeah.
And we see that all the time, actually.
Totally.
Totally. And has a very complex coordination factors of... I talk with my friends about what impact did we really have on our kids.
Yeah.
My kids... They're interesting people, but they sure are not a carbon copy of me or of my wife or anyway. They have very unique individuals, and how they got to be this way, I had something to do with. I don't know how much.
Yes.
Was it 5%? Was it 12%? I don't know.
I think that should ultimately produce compassion in people, though, because the thing the road you might go down is if you are the person who doesn't feel trauma or is not traumatized, you might look at the person in your family as, what's the matter with you? Like, I went through the same thing and I came out fine, so why are you not fine? And I'd imagine that sort of belittling complicates the process of healing from trauma.
It can go both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are really traumatically, I think about families in this way. You can be traumatically bonded. And we're in it together, and we are here for each other for survival's sake.
Yeah.
My brother and I mean, he lives in Mississippi. I live in LA. He shoots guns. I'm a super liberal. We love each other no matter what. It doesn't matter because we were connected through our trauma in a way that nothing will separate that. And then other families and other kids just go in their own, everybody's in their own separate corner, and it's survival of the fittest, and everybody does it independently. Yeah. So different families do it differently, so you can't really predict that.
Now, the one thing that's coming up for me as we're speaking is we talked about the traditional things that people associate with trauma, war, rape. Now we're talking about relational trauma. But could anything typically produce a trauma response? And what I mean by that is I'm thinking about chronic financial instability, poverty, religious coercion, institutional betrayal, racial trauma, relational humiliation. These are all different types of categories where we're like, that's not, but is it?
But there are actually, there's increasing research finally.
Yes.
So when we put the PTSD together for DSM originally, we said this is an extraordinary event outside of the usual range of human experience. Right. And that tells you how stupid we were. And we thought that trauma is extremely rare. At least 1 out of every 3 couples engages in domestic violence. It may be harder than that, actually.
Yeah.
And so 1 out of 5 girls gets molested. 1 out of 8 boys gets molested. Like, it is unbelievable how common trauma is. And now, people never talked about poverty. People never talked about racism. And just in the last few years, finally some money has become available to study it. And indeed, what do people find? Nate Garnett is studying the impact of poverty. And they find that poverty has big impact of the maturation of prefrontal cortex, which you need in order to observe yourself and know yourself. And that early neglect has a profound effect. Racism has a profound effect, and people are beginning to measure that. So the neurobiological concomitant, which these days you need in order to make it real. Yeah. Something isn't real unless you show it in the brain, even though everybody in his right mind has seen it all along.
So we're talking about...
No, poverty is not good for you. Like, it changes your dorsal prefrontal. Oh no, science has proven what it does.
That's interesting. I mean, it really brings the question of, so we're learning, we're evolving, we're learning as the days go on. And so I'm curious, you wrote this book in 2014, it's 2026. What did you even get wrong, like back then?
I don't think I wrote anything in there that today I would disagree with. And I've always been aware that what we learn, because I've always been very interested in history, I know Darwin, I know the early trauma writers, I know Mesmer, who invented hypnosis. Like, I read these old guys, and they were just as smart or smarter than we were, except they live in a different world. And so they saw the world differently because they lived in a different culture. Today, all of us have an iPhone. When I moved to Hawaii, I called my parents one time during the previous year after making a week ahead of time connection with them. Mm-hmm. Now I can call any of my friends around the world, pick up the phone. I can call my friend in Australia, I can call my friend in South Africa. I call we live in a completely different world. And so it is constantly changing. And I've always been aware of that. And so I wrote The Body Keeps Its Score, very aware that right now, this is what I know. Great. But maybe 10 years I know something very differently. And indeed, I've learned some important new things, largely about neurofeedback, but most of all about psychedelic therapy at that time. So I'll write more about that. Yeah. But I learned another important thing from going to Homeboy Industries. Yeah. And I've always been a strong believer, and there's good scientific evidence for that, for critical periods of brain development, that if you don't get the right input at the right time, it becomes extremely difficult to acquire that capacity later on. For example, some guys won the Nobel Prize for an apparent, seemingly very cruel experiment. They blindfolded some kittens between the ages of 2 and 4 weeks or something. Didn't give them visual input. They remained blind for the rest of their lives. So if you deprive the sensory system of certain input at certain times, it becomes very hard to open up that capacity. That's combat Lorentz, imprinting, that sort of stuff. And so what we learned in psychedelic therapy, it opens up the window of neuroplasticity. Yes. So if you take psychedelics, your mind becomes capable of learning. And one of the hardest things about trauma, it's so hard to learn. And we see this all the time in the people we treat. They get in the same lousy relationships over again. And as a bystander, you go, didn't you figure it out yet? And the same patterns. And so how do you change these patterns, these habits? It's extremely difficult. But then we go to Homeboy Industries, these guys who had no fathers, who were gang members, been in jail, many probably have killed people, and they're changing.
Yeah.
And you go like, what are they doing to work with guys in their 30s and 40s? And how do you get to manage to imprint a capacity for caring and loving each other? Like, wow, it may be possible after all. Huh? And there's always a question like, what else is there? And in part because I have traveled a lot, I spent a lot of time in South Africa and seeing what Bishop Tutu did. You go like, wow, this guy's amazing. Yeah. And then you go to Brazil and you see some people doing capoeira with kids. And you go like, wow, these guys are really working with these very difficult boys and they're making decent human beings out of them. So I've always been impressed with how my culture has confined me to see a certain number of things. And I don't know many other things. And then you go to Thailand and people know stuff there that I don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, you mentioned psychedelics, and we also talked about psychiatric medication. Yeah. So at one point in your career, would you say that, such a big emphasis on psychiatric medications 30, 40 years ago, would you say at one point you even thought that might be a really good route for trauma, and that has evolved and as we went on? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it was very much at the hospital where Frank and I both trained. I trained about maybe 10 years earlier. So I was part of the first wave of that hospital. It was a major engine of the pharmacological revolution. And boy, was I part of that.
Yeah.
Because all we had was psychoanalysis, which was not particularly helpful. And then, this chemical. Oh, look what serotonin does.
Yes.
See what norepinephrine does.
Yeah.
And we were all excited about this new possibility.
Yeah.
And it was exciting. And so I did the first study on Prozac for PTSD, first study on Zola for PTSD, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't great either. And so my job is Hippocratic Oath. My job is to get people better. And the medicines, for some people, helped a little bit. And then I go like, what else can we do? And then talking, groups, and then somebody starts doing this weird stuff, EMDR, and everybody thinks it's crazy, including me. And I see some videos, and you see people being transformed by this stupid thing. It's interesting. That's a new paradigm. And so we did the first EMDR research, and it came out very well. I thought that everybody would talk about this paper because the results were so great, but many people talked about how crazy the method was instead of looking at the results.
Really? I didn't know that. I was a psychiatrist for that study. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Libby, all the people, we were right there. It was so innovative. That's one thing Bessel has always done, is bring in these new, interesting things. It was amazing. It was
I gave what we saw today.
Yeah.
It's still new.
It's still new and it's still amazing. At Homeboy. There is this... There is this, you got to go back and you got to look, and you can't just go forward. We were talking about this in the car. So when you have this trauma, there's energy in your body. There's something you're carrying that weighs you down that needs to be released. And that is not enough, and not only what it is. There's this chemical thing that can be altered. And there's the moving forward differently in life, which I think psychotherapy is not great at. And there's other places all over the world that Bessel's talking about that are really good at love and connection to give you a corrective experience that's very different. And I think we got to put all that together as we kind of move forward.
Because I mean, what I'm getting at is like, there's a version of this conversation where people read your book, or they listen to everything that we just said, and then they think, okay, so I need to just talk it out in therapy, and I need to take some pills, and like that will heal my trauma.
No. And that clearly turned out not to be the case. And so we did, and we found some things out. And I'm also very much a researcher. And when people say something like, oh, this is fantastic, my attitude is always skeptical. Like, is that because of you? Is it because you're a therapist? Is it whatever? And does it work for everybody? And I know from experience that nothing works for everybody.
You got it. Yeah.
And so then you get into like, for whom does it work and for whom it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, give you an example. I have a friend. I don't want to mention it, but you know him.
Yes.
Used to be at NIH when I was there.
Yeah.
Big dissociation person.
Yep.
Got prostate cancer all over his body.
Yes.
12 years ago. He was dying. I went to visit him a bunch of times, say goodbye to him. He went to the Johns Hopkins end-of-life psychedelic thing. He had a fantastic mystical experience, even though his basic mind is an engineering mind, very scientific, very precise. And he saw, I think he had unbelievable things. He cried his eyes out when he told me about it. 12 years later, he's alive. He had fulminating cancer all over his body. He still has cancer all over his body, but it's not growing. And I say to him, what do your doctors say in that very prestigious institute where he's being treated? And he says, oh, they just dismiss it as I'm a statistical outlier. And I thought, what a lost chance.
Yeah.
If somebody unexpectedly survives, you better study what makes him survive. And so that's always been interesting to me. So some people do really well in, let's say, internal family systems therapy. And then I want to know for whom does it work and for whom it doesn't work. And what are the pre-existing conditions that you need in order to benefit from that.
That's really interesting because, there's been a lot of research around, spontaneous remission and mind-body. And so that sort of mystical experience, precluding that, whatever mind shift or thing happened for him clearly impacted his body.
His physiology,
yes.
right. And so my thinking is, what happened to his immune system? How do we measure his cytokines? What is happening in his hypothalamus? What's happening in his pituitary gland? That's all way beyond your conscious brain. But those drugs, for him, clearly rearrange something on a very deep level in his brain. How common is that? How can we harvest that? How can we generalize from that? Because most people died. Almost everybody else died.
Well, and it brings in spirituality in a way that we've talked about spirituality and psychotherapy to not mix. Like those worlds can be put together in a certain way. Who knows how much whatever else that was also contributes. I hope at some point, this is what the theme of Oxford is this year, is integrating psychotherapy and spirituality. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conference to kind of see in September, like, is there a way to put these worlds together? Because what is that variable and how does that contribute or not to what's happening to people?
Of course, it's terribly important.
It is.
We talked about it before.
Yes.
That the instinct of purpose that Pavlov introduces to, this Russian guy, and William James, is terribly important. This feeling of, I'm here for a reason. I have a job to be done. How do you get it? And the spiritual dimension is huge.
I agree.
But there's two words that are forbidden in our field. One is spiritual, mystical, and the other one is love. If you put love into scientific paper,
oh my God,
it will get rejected.
Well, I think what's interesting is
you're right. Let me hold on 1 second. Drove me crazy when I wrote Transcending Trauma, my second book. I wanted trauma blocks love, love heals trauma. Trauma blocks love. It just kept coming up in my head. We can't say love in the title. We can't. They refused. The publisher was like, absolutely not. And I read a memoir. They're like, okay, go ahead, put the word love in it. But you're right. Love is not allowed, which is crazy.
It's crazy
because it's one of the essences of healing. It's the essence.
It's the essence of life. Like
we've got some to learn in that way.
But it's bizarre. Yeah.
I mean, you had mentioned. So you mentioned you come from a family of religious fanaticism, and what I find to be interesting about that is that when you think about science and the field of science, like the scientific method is one thing, but then the mindsets of scientists are another thing. And so it's interesting because you could get the religious fanaticism, but then you could also sort of get that in science as well, where people are so clinging to their worldview, that anything that would sort of like disrupt that. And so it's like, no, things are material, like it's exactly this way in this box, and so it needs to fit in there, which ironically isn't science. Like when you put yourself in a box and say it could only be this way,
but
despite this emerging evidence that you're talking around with psychedelics and spirituality, it maybe it's just like a threatening thing in terms of
for me it's very puzzling. So I grew up with a whole cohort of people who were starting with trauma, and almost everybody else I know found a theme somewhere 30 years ago and still doing the same damn thing as they did 30 years ago. And the same treatment, it causes 7% improvement. They've done enough studies so it's officially recognized as an evidence-based treatment, but most of the time it doesn't work. And instead of trying out new things, they keep studying the same thing and telling that the studies show that it doesn't work. Oh, they did it wrong, and if they'd done it right, it would have worked.
But so I have to call you out again, Bessel, because this is one of the things that's unique about you compared to many of the other people in our field, is these people, I'm not going to name any of the names, but they get attached to their thing.
That's right.
And they get ownership of it, and they think it is the way. And they get stuck, and they're not able to learn or interested in learning.
Interested in
learning. You have never been like that. And, you know, Bessel's like, I don't have a model. I think all of them can be useful, and I think that's kept you open, where a lot of other people get really too narrow and constricted. That's what I'm hoping. I'm creating this whole new way of kind of working, and I'm like, don't call it a model. Don't call it a model, because I don't want to get stuck in a paradigm, because then I'm going to have to defend my model, and I'm going to lose my ability to see the world, because you've always done that, and not everybody does.
But I also think that the people who get very married to a particular treatment have their own job in the world to really perfect that particular treatment.
Yeah, that's great.
And to teach it to other people. And I couldn't do that because I would always say, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. Or maybe you want to try that instead of staying with that. And so I'm too relativistic. And you need people in the world to say, no, let me teach you how to do it correctly. Which is how we learned surgery, which is important. Not like, let's do the best we can.
That's great. I love that. That's like they have a role too. They have a role, because all those people have moved the field forward also.
So
it's true.
We've been circling around it, but let's just name it clearly, especially in light of the studies you've been doing. So what does psychedelics actually do for trauma? Like what's happening there? That is a great
question. And we don't know, but it gets you out of your habits. And the paper that I wrote, I think is maybe the most important paper I've written. It hardly ever gets quoted. It changes your sense of compassion for yourself. There is something about every one of the psychedelics that open up your pathways to yourself. And many people have very painful experiences on psychedelics, and memories come back and experiences that can be extremely painful, but there is something about people's minds that lets down all the defenses. In IFS language, the parts step back.
Yes.
And you see that very vividly. And people can feel what they feel and feel a lot of pain, but they also get a sense of, oh, this happened to me when I was 2, or happened to me when I was 6. And they see themselves on some way like what they went through back then. And they got to see, oh, I was just a stupid adolescent. Oh, I was just a little girl who loved her daddy, and then this happened to me. Oh, I did the best I could, but I didn't know how to handle it. I was too young. I needed somebody to help me back then. And so these experiences give people a sense of perspective and a sense of compassion for their own experiences. And they go like, I did the best I could, and I feel so bad that I had to deal with it when I was so little. If I had to do it today, I would know what to do. And I keep still blaming myself for being as stupid as I was back then. But now I realize I was only 6 years old. And so people get a sense of perspective, a sense of self-compassion. And the next thing that happens is even more amazing, that people start feeling, oh, actually, I was a beautiful little kid who got so abused. And the next thing comes up, and I feel so bad for my alcoholic, violent father because he never got to enjoy that beautiful child he had, me.
Yeah,
I see it all the time.
Yeah, it's experiencing the limitations or the vulnerability in the perpetrator after the process of healing.
Yeah, and that is really like, wow.
Yeah, it's like I did psychedelics and we went through the ketamine training, but I had that very similar experience with my experience with my dad.
Yeah.
After I released enough of what I was carrying, I saw the vulnerability and the fragility in him. Yeah. And I had compassion for his woundedness in a way that allowed me to love him. But, and it's, I was going to, so it can happen with or without psychedelics. I was able to do that work without it, but that's really what healing is, right?
That's hard, huh? For in your right frame of mind to get to that position.
I'll say I was in therapy a hell of a long time. Like it took me a long time to get there, right? And the piece around psychedelics that I want to talk about too, which I don't think we know enough about yet, but you would know more than me, is the different ones do different things. They're not all doing the same thing.
But we don't know yet.
I know, that's what I'm saying. We don't know who's doing what because ketamine's an anti-glutamate and MDMA is so they're doing different things. So we haven't differentiated, right?
Chemically, they're completely different substances. But, I use ketamine in my practice because it's legal. Yeah. And I did MDMA research. I did LSD as a young man. And in some ways, they all do the same thing.
Do you think so? Is that right?
But I really honor Humphrey Osmond, who coined the term psychedelic. He had to move from England to Saskatchewan, of all places, where he coined the term. And psychedelic means mind manifesting. And I go, that was the right word for it.
Got it. And
you manifest your mind. You see yourself in all your complexity.
And that's across the board. You see that no matter which one. So you see a commonality. Because I wasn't sure. I haven't studied them in the way that you have, obviously. But people
don't know. I asked people I consider myself a beginner. I've only done it for 10 years. It takes a long time. And it looks like ibogaine may be particularly helpful for addictions.
I see.
But we haven't done the studies to see if ketamine changes addictions. Johns Hopkins did end-of-life depression with psilocybin. So psilocybin is for end-of-life depression. Yeah. Is MDMA just as good? We don't know.
Will that be the
Now, you mentioned in 2014, like this is the last 10 years. Yeah. So if you could go back, revise the book, and add something about psychedelics, what would you want people to know?
We know more about critical periods, and we know more about how to change people's minds, actually, in general. But the research shows, and you'll hear this guy at the Trauma Conference, Tsakiris, and we have two presentations on it. In order to change, you need to get different sensory input into your motor system, in your vision, in the way you move. So you need to do something, and that's different from what you originally knew. And that you can change the brain by giving people different sensory input. And the model I've had for a long time was basic training in the military, which is quite miraculous. And I spent some time in Camp Lejeune with Marines. I'm definitely not a Marine myself, but I saw they get these recruits who usually come from very deprived backgrounds. They have dropped out of school, not doing well at all. They join the military as a way of escaping terrible things. And then they get put for basic training, which is hard as all hell. And every night you go to bed thinking, oh my God, I can't do this for another day. I can't do this too much. And the next day you do it, and the next day you do it. And after 12 weeks you go like, oh my God, I'm amazing. Look what I've done. I've survived basic training. I'm a U.S. Marine. Yeah. And you have changed your identity by extremely hard work and physical work that gives you a different relationship to your body. And that's why I love Kabaddi programs for brain victims.
Yes.
Yep. Capoeira for inner-city kids. Yeah. Yes, I have a body that can move and I can do things.
Right.
And you need to have the experience.
Yes.
So, what psychotherapy is missing, as Frank already has said, it misses how do you put new stuff into people.
Yeah.
So,
the one thing that the other thing that is highly relevant, and it almost, some of the studies almost feels like it's being presented as magic, but like the EMDR, right? So like I was looking at a couple studies. One was up to 84% healing for, I think these were one-time events.
Yep.
How is that possible? Because EMDR is so weird. It's just like it's strange. It's just I'm gonna move my eyes then
I said that's why EMDR for me was my gateway drug. Huh?
Yeah.
And Frank was part of this study.
That's right.
And I thought this is crazy. And everybody said it was crazy.
Yes.
And then, but I see these videotapes before and after. I go, this person's brain is completely changed. I want to figure out what's happening in the brain. First, you see what it does clinically. Our results were astounding.
Yes.
And then we did a follow-up study with Lanius and Shireen Havazarian, and we found out a little bit about what the eye movements do, and they activate new circuitry in the brain that connects your emotional center of the brain with the body center of the brain, with the time center of the brain, so your brain somehow can reinterpret what happens through in a new light.
Yeah.
Again, very similar in some ways as psychedelics.
Yeah.
Psychedelics see it more
right.
clearly because EMDR goes so fast you don't know what happens. Of like, yes, this happened, but it happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that was all these have all effective methods give you that sense of time.
Yeah. I want to highlight what he says because, like regardless of what treatment you're talking about, EMDR, sensory motor, IFS, blah blah blah, this capacity to be with and not live in, and have that perspective to be able to do it differently with this being with component is key for any therapy that you're looking at. If you have the capacity to observe, and that EMDR does it, sensory motor psychotherapy does it, somatic, they all have the be with component. So I think it's important for people, the listener, to know, like, there are certain key things. Psychedelics has it too. You're like over here, you're observing it and watching it. That's not the only answer, but it is a key component to any kind of effective trauma treatment is not in it and relive it, because you reinforce those trauma neural networks when you're in it versus whatever does it to be with it. And even EMDR, they're saying taxes motor memory in a way to keep you out of it instead of in it, is one of the theories about why the bilateral stimulation works, because it taxes memory in a way that then doesn't allow you to slip in. So that's an important component to healing.
And what they all have in common is indeed going inside and meeting what's inside of you.
Yes.
And if as long as you keep it out there, oh, that happened to me, look what they did to me, you're not going to change. You get some sympathy maybe, but you don't change anything until you go deep inside, and that's always painful.
So explain to me, how does it work? You're sitting down. What are you reflecting on? What are you doing in the moment?
There's a whole protocol. It's called adaptive information processing, and there's a protocol and steps to it. Think of a negative cognition. I'm bad, I'm unlovable. You think of a positive cognition. I'm good and I'm worthy. And then they rate them. They have what's called the SUDS, and you rate them for different different scales. I feel unworthy as a 10, and I feel lovable as a 1. And then, like, okay, let's go. And then you just do bilateral. You can do hand tapping. You could do eye movement. I do EMDR pretty much 3 times a week when I'm running in the canyons. I'm doing bilateral stimulation, and I'm processing stuff constantly. I know that. You can do it this way. You hand tapping. So it's not only the eyes, although eyes are more effective. So this is bilateral stimulation that does something that allows your mind to be integrated in the way that Bessel was talking about, to get you integrated, and you can see things and observe things and process things in a different way. It's really quite remarkable. And
it's still, even like we did a neuroscience study, we have a long way to go.
With the EMDR?
With everything. about how little we still know about what happens in the brain.
Yeah.
Now, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the talk therapy piece, it seems like 40 years ago there was talk about your trauma, like just talk. Yeah. How has our understanding of that evolved?
I have evolved over that from only doing talking therapy, putting it down, and now it's very important to have language for yourself. That's how we become human. We are little babies, and we are reactive, and then slowly develop language in order to become a member of your family, a member of the world, to communicate your internal states to the outside world, to say what you like, what you don't like, to share it with people who like the same things. And Paul Simon is playing in Tanglewood on June 30th. Would you like to get a ticket? Oh, then we can go do this. So having language for yourself is terribly important. Mm-hmm. Being able to describe yourself is terribly important. Being able to communicate your internal states, terribly important. And most people who come to see us have very little language for themselves. And also when I was in analysis, he did not help me to develop language for myself. He interpreted how screwed up I was, which was not particularly helpful, because my wife already did that for me. But to really find what was it like for you? What did you experience back then? How did you react to it? How do you feel about it? How you reacted to it? What would you have liked to have done differently? But how else can we arrange this? How else can we do things? You create options. You create possibilities for language. If you have no language, you have no possibilities.
I'll say a couple of things about it, which just to give more clarity on what Bessel's saying. So there's implicit memory and explicit memory. Okay, implicit's unconscious. It's only emotional and somatic. Implicit memory. Explicit is you're talking about it, you're describing it, you're able to kind of put it first, second, and third, put it in sequence, have a narrative. You have to do both. Like as I was in psychoanalysis for 5 times a week for 11 years also. And when you're just talking about it from up here, it's not going to help. But when you put those two worlds together, talking about the way Bessel just described, talking about it with emotion, with somatic experience, when you put those implicit and explicit together, then that's a very different way of using language. It's that integrates those two different experiences. Is that accurate to say?
And that observing piece is so important.
Yeah.
And that's a role that also a therapist to some degree plays. Because you're observing. But, for example, when we did the MDMA study, the psychedelic study, I wish that we had used hypnosis as a control group.
Oh, interesting.
But we were stacked against this.
They're like...
Because hypnosis used to be the treatment for trauma for at least a century until it disappeared with the false memory syndrome. And people say, oh, you implant false memories in people. And I said, I've been wanting to install false memories into people. Like, you're safe. You're not a bad person.
That's right. That's right.
But people say, oh, that's not the hypnosis anymore. But I think every good treatment of trauma involves being in a trance, being not in a linear frame of mind. Yeah. And as long as you stay linear, it doesn't work. You need to really open up that implicit and explicit memory experiences.
Because you've talked about how like there's a version of this where trauma, I mean, talking about your trauma could actually encode the traumatic
that's actually one of the most first observations I made. What happened is that I went to the VA in 1978. The war had just ended. People came in, and we didn't have enough staff to see the patients. But I saw these guys were in bad distress, so I got permission, which I couldn't imagine anybody getting today, of meeting with people who were on the wait list to be admitted to our clinic, who didn't have a chart yet, and meet them in the waiting room of the clinic. And I started groups for veterans. And then they started to talk to each other. And they said, I don't want to talk about the war. I said, you can talk about anything you want to. And nothing happened. And they started to talk about the war, and they got excited and engaged and alive. And so the first paper I wrote about the neurobiology of trauma includes the title, An Addiction to Trauma. Because your trauma makes you feel alive. At the same time, it makes you feel terrible, makes you feel horrible about yourself. But your energy is up there.
You're activated.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, so I spent my years at VA talking with people about the war, and I tried to get them to talk about other things, and I failed. And that means my treatment failed because the trauma continued to be the only important thing in their life. And my job was really to help them be alive in response to their kids, and in response to their jobs, and in response to vacations. But they felt dead unless they talked about the trauma. And now we know from the work of our friend Rusenius what actually happens, because trauma really interferes with that core state of who you are, and when there's no danger, it doesn't get activated.
Yeah. So the mind body, what role does the regulation of like the emotion? Because if you're so activated, well, that interfered talking about this in a helpful way.
Well, like, for example, you're shut down. Shutting down is really a very big part of trauma, much bigger than people know. And so you may not feel any pleasure of being touched. Very common. Touch is a core element. We are tactile individuals. We get our first sensory system in our mother's womb, and we feel her amniotic fluid and the belly contraction for us. We can hear the sounds out of ourselves. Then we come into the world and we see things and we feel things. But most of all, we get held and rocked, and we have a body. Our greatest source of comfort is being held and rocked. Skin to skin, ventral to ventral contact, as you call it in the monkey research laboratory. And if touch becomes scary to you, or you don't feel anything, life passes you by to some degree. And so a very important part of the work that I encourage and promote is body work, where you learn to feel what your body feels like, and feel your body, feel the pleasure of touch, feel the comfort of being hugged and sort of stuff. And many people we see don't want to be hugged. They're afraid because it brings up feelings of, I'm getting raped, I'm getting assaulted. And then people say, you should never touch a child because it may interpret it as sexual abuse. And I go, only if you have been raped. Because otherwise you would not interpret that as being sexual intercourse. Like, hey, my friend is touching me. But touch is very important. And people are terrified of touch in our field. But I don't think you can get better until you have a living body that enjoys the pleasure of other bodies around you.
What would you say about that?
I totally agree with what Bessel's saying. And it's, again, I want to go back to the being with, because if you can talk about it and then it's up here, but regulation is a safety and connection, that's so important to allow people to be with the fear and the sensations that are in their body. Part of what's so important for me, just over and over again, in order to heal from your trauma, you have to feel some of the pain, but you can't relive it. You have to be in relationship with somebody who's safe and be with it yourself. So many people want to just bypass the piece of being with the pain and being with the physical sensations. That can't, like for me so far, we can't just bypass that piece. Being with the emotion, not stuck in it and living it over again, and being with those physical sensations where it's stored. You've got to find the regulatory capacity, whether it's in relationship or it's internally, because you've built a capacity to be with this. So many people are looking for the quick way out, and it's not going to happen. You've got to be with it in a way to move through it. Would you agree with that?
And not only your own body. As I'm sitting next to you, we're old friends. I feel his energy and the energy of his body, and it feels good to me. But for the same token, the same energy could remind me of a bully in high school, and I'm going, I can't stand this person. I will shut myself down.
100%.
And so taking in other people's bodies is also important. But if you have, after you have been molested and hurt and ignored, you don't get pleasure of the other person's body and company, which was so striking in homo industries, where people got so much from pleasure out of being in each other's vicinity, which is very striking to see, because most traumatized people are really defensive. And
I'm sure they come in that way, and it's not the way they stay, because they can feel the safety in connection, and then it allows them to feel safer to go inside to be with the horrific. It's a both and. It's really a both and.
So, I mean, we talked about EMDR, psychedelics, talk therapy, regulation. You know, as we're getting the home stretch of this, one thing I wanted to hit big was relational trauma, because we brought that up earlier. And you just exploded on social media over this. You had a clip about passive versus abusive parents. So can you explain what happened in that clip, what you said, and then why you feel like that struck such a chord?
Yeah, it was kind of strange, but it was a little bit about what we talked about earlier. So everybody focuses on the big, loud, screaming parent, right? The one who screams and I was yelled at, verbally abused, beat up. That's the obvious one to work on, right? And so everybody focuses on the big, bad, loud parent. And in some ways, and I'm really unpacking this, I'm curious to what you think about. My mom, the passive parent who was accommodating, who supported the relationship, who needed that person for their own issues, was actually more impactful for me than the big. I was like, you get the bruise, that's one thing. These are those invisible wounds. And one of the things that's so complicated about the invisible wound, I knew my mother loved me. There was no question she loved me, no question at all. But I also knew she would choose my father over me 100% of the time. And so what ends up happening, and I think this is partly why it resonated so much, is that was my template for love. I knew that. My dad hated me. She loved me and she betrayed me. So that was that hit in a very different way, and it takes a longer time to get to that because the other one is so big and loud. And I just think it resonates with people. I don't think we talk. I don't think we talk enough about abuse or the impact of passivity.
And that is in my, by now, very large practice over the years. At the end, people are most resentful about the person who didn't do anything. And almost everybody I can think of is more upset by the passive bystander who refused to intervene, stand on their behalf, rather than the person who actually abused them. And it's so consistent, actually, that the blind person who didn't see, at the end becomes the greatest source of pain and loss.
Because that was for me, that was the only source of connection. So to feel that your connection betrayed you, your survival strategy, your survival connection betrayed you, is devastating. And usually people don't get to that until much later. That's okay, I'm ready to go, but I'm done. And holy cow, there's this whole other piece that I have to unpack, which is really devastating. It was devastating for me and for a lot of people.
I mean, logically, when you think about it, it's like you can't have an abusive parent without a passive parent,
right?
And so, if something's happening in the home, then someone else must be standing there or allowing it at some level. That doesn't mean maybe that person could overpower the other person, but
that's what Bessel said. His daughter, she's not gonna, if she meets a guy who's kind of sleazy or whatever, she's not gonna stay. She's gonna get out. That combination has to be two-sided in order for it to be perpetuated.
It's huge, and okay, that's all I can say.
How does someone work through the relational piece? Because some of these things, like if there was a stranger, it was something else. But when it's your own family, when it's someone close to you, how do you work through that?
That's something I was going to say, is that every relationship is complicated. And so negotiating aggression with your spouse and saying, if you yell at your kid one more time, I'll divorce you, and put all of us in danger of, like, it's incredibly difficult to negotiate it. I would never poo-poo it and say, oh, you should have gotten out or something, because I know how hard it is for people to get out of a relationship and what they blow up by doing it. And so every relationship that works is like, wow, we have a relationship that works. That's amazing.
It's like secure attachment. It always blows me away. Like, who the heck has that? Right. The other thing I'll say about that, which was really striking to me, I did a conference recently with Elizabeth Smart, right? Those of us who remember her, she was abducted when she was 14 years old. And she said something really powerful. She said, I was taken in the middle of the night out of my bed by a stranger who was bad. I knew every single day I had to survive another day, but these are evil people. She said, it's very different than when you are being abused and harmed by somebody who is supposed to love you and who you need for survival.
She's able to see that, huh?
It was brilliant for her to. She said, Bessel, you want to talk about resilience? She's like, every single day, I woke up for 9 months. She was up in the mountains being horribly abused. I will do whatever I need to do in this next 24 hours to live another day. And that's what she did every single day, but she had the capacity to see these are bad people, not they're supposed to love me, but they're also violating me. So she said that was one of the differences that allowed her to survive, which is brilliant. And, you know, when it's your parents, when you're supposed to love them, it's, as Bessel said, so much more complicated. So much more complicated.
Can you share about your story a little bit and what happened with your I find it to be so interesting, you know, that you're doing what you're doing right now and you have so much experience in the field too, but such a huge backstory. You wrote a whole memoir on this about what happened with your father, your own personal trauma history.
Yeah, I can share. Sure. I mean, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. Like, now I know this exactly what was supposed to happen, and that may sound crazy, but it's totally true. But when I wrote this memoir, I knew you're not going to school today, Frankie, was going to be the opening line. I totally knew that, because that's what changed my whole life and my trajectory. Was I got caught playing with a Barbie doll in my cousin's basement. And back then it was a disorder. It was totally wrong and bad. Well-intended parents took me to a psychiatrist, and I was in conversion therapy for 10 years maybe?
You too.
10 years probably. Every week I had to play with, this guy, I can feel this. I had to play with the boy toys, and I wasn't allowed to play with any of the girl toys. And it was just, I was brainwashed to be a normal boy. And then I'd go home, and my dad was, I don't even know what I did that activated such rage in him, but then he beat me and yelled at me and screamed at me for years and years and years. Like hundreds of times, I remember that. And so I talk about dissociation. I shut down. I know what dissociation, I know how to not feel and live and function. And I had this idea, get grades, get good grades, get out of the house. This was my ticket out. So I became super, super smart, you know, and it all fell. I married a woman. I did all the right things. I knew what I was supposed to do to kind of survive. And then it all fell apart. It just all fell apart. And it was not until I was in my residency program when I started working with these people that had such horrific trauma histories. We worked with people who had no insurance and had no insurance and were homeless. This is what mass mental was at the time. They activated something so powerful in me. That's when I kind of like fell apart, because I felt their pain. This is part of why Homeboy is so powerful for me, because I resonated with those people, and that's kind of where my life fell apart. Yeah, that's where my life fell apart. And then I came out. I was going to lose everybody. There's no way I would have a family, you know. Bessel, I remember this. I was just going to say, this is weird. He's like, I'm going to tell this story. If it's okay, we'll edit it out, whatever. Bessel wanted me to kind of marry his daughter at some point. And he was like, hey, I like this guy. You can take over the clinic and marry my daughter. Right? And I was like one of the first gay people.
Everybody in the clinic knew that Frank was gay, except for me.
I gave him an education. I gave myself an education because it was so not allowed on so many levels, right? And then the thing that was kind of probably the worst moment of my life was when I had kids and started doing to my kids what was done to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's when I got suicidal. And we were in supervision groups around that time when I started, because I was in analysis forever. I figured it out and understood it, but it was so still stuck in my body. Yeah. That's really where the change happened, where I started working on the body and the emotions to release all the stuff that I carry. And it's a very different life now. Yeah. Very, very different life.
If someone goes through the trauma healing process, does forgiveness do something? I mean, we're really down the line, but in healing, but does that actually do something for someone?
Don't push forgiveness on people. I see it all the time. People want to push people to forgive prematurely. It's very hard to forgive if the perpetrator doesn't regret what they did to you.
Yes.
And by and large, an important danger of forgiveness is that you give permission to the abuser to have done to you what you did. And it's very important for you to say, it was not okay. And not to forgive. And to say, you really deserve something horrible for what you did to me. But I won't do it to you. But premature being pushed into forgiving people who have no regrets about abusing you is not good at all. And people do it all the time, push on people. Yeah. Oh, let bygones be bygones. He's just an old guy. He's demented. Don't worry about it. No, he did terrible things to you, and you need to acknowledge the reality of what he did to you. And maybe you, at some point, love yourself well enough to say, I'm okay anyway, despite what you did to me. So it's okay what you did to me, but not like it was okay what you did. It's really important.
I totally agree with what Bessel's saying. And one of the things that happened with me with my dad, which was so remarkable, and I say forgiveness after healing.
That's right.
This is what I say, forgiveness after healing, because I saw the vulnerability in him. And I was lucky enough, the last words he ever said to me was, I'm not the parent you needed and wanted, but I always loved you.
That's beautiful.
I got that. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I was able to release it. And the thing for me that forgiveness has been so powerful for was I no longer carry the feelings I have towards what he did to me. Forgiveness is about the person doing the forgiving, not about being forced to forgive, in my view. So I feel free. I can love him now, and I'm not holding the anger and the resentment. But I agree with Bessel around it's forced prematurely in culture and society all the time. But if it's done in the right way, it can be totally freeing for the person who's doing the forgiving versus the person who's being forgiven.
Right.
That's what I'll add to it.
Only have two final questions.
That's very good. Yeah. Worth listening to you.
Thank you, Bessel. Thank you.
So, I mean, we've went so many places. I feel like this was such a thorough understanding of trauma and covering so many bases. And so, obviously, you've spent 50 years studying trauma. That is a really, really, really long time. And so, as you begin to wind down this chapter, your public work, what is one thing about trauma that you would want people most to understand as they move forward from this conversation?
What comes to mind as an immediate impulse is to realize that you did the best you could under the circumstances. I learned this from Pierre Genet, actually, that everybody tries to do the best they do, but maybe you don't have the resources or the skills or the capacities or knowledge to do it very well. But like you asked, what's the symptom of trauma? Cutting yourself and burning yourself is a great example. And I've studied it extensively, and I was very interested in why do people cut themselves? And then I got to realize it makes them feel better to cut themselves. And I go like, that's weird. If I cut myself, I'm sure that would not make me feel better. And it made me realize they have a different biology than I do. That makes them feel calm when they cut. How interesting. So that seems to be a way in which their body has learned to deal with trauma to make them feel calmer. And so they have changed their chemistry, or their chemistry has been changed by the trauma to get comfort out of something that would only cause pain in other people. And so that is their adaptation. And these are all adaptations to try to survive.
Yep.
And you did the best you could.
I firmly believe that people are good and that trauma is energy that we absorb that doesn't belong to us. And it really messes with our abilities to live a life, be connected, and have a good, valuable life. And I want people to know that that energy is possible to release. People can release the energy that doesn't belong to them. Like, you are not your trauma. And there are all the ways we're working on to release this energy, all different ways. We talked about tons of different ways. To release that energy so you could be more of your good self without the trauma, which isn't yours in the first place. And it's a message of hope for me that I want to keep giving. I want to bring trauma healing to the world to let people know this can be released. Different people with different resources and different temperaments, but it's possible. I want everybody to know it's possible.
I agree with you, but also I'm thinking about your first example of the woman who was in that abusive relationship, who was passive, that if she doesn't have the wherewithal to move out and would have to move into the streets, that really makes it much harder. So the issue of resources is very big.
Yes, it is.
But I like to say these days, if you are independently wealthy or you have good enough money, you can find treatment and you will get better.
Yeah.
If you keep trying, there will be something that works for you. But if you don't have money, you need to work 3 jobs and you have 5 kids at home to feed them. Good luck to you. Huh? And so the whole inequality issue is very much on my mind. That some people have much better resources than other people do.
100%. One of the things I'm doing right now, we haven't talked about this, I'm trying to create some kind of program and resource for people outside of psychotherapy. I think there is not enough therapists in the world to heal the trauma. And this is my next book. This is what I'm working on right now, is what can we offer the people who don't have the resources, don't have the money. And that is my next project.
And in some ways they're basketball coaches.
Yes. 100%. Skateboard,
teachers,
ballet, all the things that we talked about, the outside of psychotherapy. So that is one of my passions, is like, we're not going to heal the world in psychotherapy offices. We've got to step outside. So I'm going to do what I can to help move that needle.
Yeah, talk to me about that a little, just the Path to Healing Trauma.
Yes, it's a new course I'm releasing as a Path to Healing Trauma, and it's kind of moving people through with education, with experience, with peer support, just like they do in China, to give people a true...
We learned a lot in China, didn't we?
Oh my gosh, we learned a lot from Hailan in China. Like, it can be done. It doesn't have to be done in a therapist's office only, with the right support. I really feel strongly about it, and it's complicated, but I want people to know that this can be done in different ways, because otherwise the scales are tipping in the wrong direction. So I want to be part of the solution, and I hope this course and the book is part of that.
Final word, you mentioned the word hope. And so for both of you, someone clicked into this or listening to this right now, probably at some level, because they are struggling. So for someone who is in the middle of it right now, what would you want them to know? What would you say to them?
Well, you need to access resources. And you need to start with something you can tolerate reading. And there's many people who write about their own survival stories. 2 of my patients this past year have written best-selling books about their path to healing. And they do both very well with it. I say, good. That's good books to read of somebody else who went through what you went through, who provides you with hope. If you also want to learn about attachment theory and neuroscience, you can do that. Read my book, but it will be a hard book to read. But there's all kinds of books out there, including Peter Levine's books, very readable. Your book, Janina's work. There's many resources. And go on the internet and see what you can find that appeals to you. And what they say to people who come from your consults, always people who have read my books, they say, what should I do? I said, what you should do is to see what you have underlined, what appeals to you. And some chapters were boring to you, don't do that. If you read a story that say, that's about me, go deeper into it. But so be curious about yourself. And when you condemn yourself, you live in shame. You're not curious about yourself. And that's where therapy comes in, because the therapist hopefully is curious about you and helps you to be curious about yourself and doesn't go like, oh my God, that's fucked up. How can I make you not do that? It's like, interesting. What does that do for you? What has it done for you in the past? And to be curious rather than enhancing people's shame. And much of our treatment is shaming, including what I've done with people sometimes.
That's a hard question. I'm thinking about that, Matthew, as you're asking me that, because I'm trying to put myself back in the middle of my journey. I'm not done. I'll never be done. But back in the middle of it, like I think about when I was like the lack of love is what made me suicidal. Right. The lack of love and connection is what put me in my darkest moments. And how do you, I guess for me, it's about in your darkest moments, or you're in the middle of it, or you feel like there's no way out. I would say reach for connection is the thing that feels the most life-saving to me, love and connection. And that kind of the resilience to get better, it does get better. Like, read the stories, watch the movies. It really can get better. See people who have been through it. But it's hard when you're in it and do what you can to get out of it so that you can have a different perspective instead of the trauma narrative. I think is really powerful and hard to do, but important.
Beautiful. Well, thank you both for all that you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful conversation.
It was a nice combination, by the way. We're good for each other.
You think so? I think so too. I agree. That was great.
Yeah.